February 1860. The morning was cold and gray, the kind of morning that felt like an ending. Annabelle Whitmore stood on the front steps of Whitmore Hall, watching her husband's carriage disappear down the long oak-lined drive. Jonathan was leaving for an extended business voyage, 9 months, perhaps longer, traveling between New Orleans, Havana, Liverpool, and Boston to expand his shipping empire. He had kissed her cheek perfunctorily before departing, his mind already on contracts and cargo manifests. "Manage the household well," he'd told her. "I expect everything in order when I return." She'd nodded, said the right words, played the dutiful wife. And now he was gone, and she stood alone in front of a house that had never felt like a home. 17 rooms, 43 slaves, endless fields of cotton stretching toward a horizon that seemed to swallow hope itself. And her, 23 years old, married for 3 years, childless, purposeless, trapped in a life that felt more like death. She turned and walked back into the house, and the silence swallowed her whole. The first weeks after Jonathan's departure were the loneliest of Annabelle's life. She moved through the house like a ghost, reading books she didn't care about, eating meals she couldn't taste, sleeping in a bed that felt as vast and empty as an ocean. It was March when she first really noticed the garden and the man who tended it. Silas had been at Whitmore Hall for 2 years, purchased from an estate sale in Mississippi. He was perhaps 30 years old, tall and strong, with hands that moved through the earth with a gentleness that seemed impossible in such a brutal world. He talked to the plants as he worked, whispering encouragement to roses, coaxing life from seeds, treating every living thing with tenderness. One afternoon, seeking air that wasn't trapped inside walls, Annabelle walked into the garden. Silas was kneeling among the roses, pruning dead blooms. "What are you saying to them?" she asked. He startled, nearly dropped his shears. When he looked up, his eyes were wide with something between fear and surprise. "Nothing, ma'am. Just talking to keep myself company." "They don't mind." A pause. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. "No, ma'am, they seem to like it." She should have walked away. Masters' wives didn't linger in gardens, didn't make conversation with enslaved men. But she was so tired of silence, so desperate for any human connection that she stayed. "What do you tell them?" He lifted his eyes just enough to meet hers for a heartbeat. "I tell them about rain and roots and growing toward the sun. I tell them they're beautiful, even when they're dying." Something in her chest cracked open. That's lovely. Thank you, ma'am." She left then, but the image stayed with her, his hands in the soil, his voice soft with tenderness. That night, she dreamed of roses and couldn't say why. The music started a week later. Late one evening, as Annabelle lay in bed unable to sleep, she heard it, the clear, sweet voice of a violin, drifting up through the floorboards. She followed the sound through the dark house to a small room off the kitchen, where she found Elias seated with his violin, eyes closed, body swaying as he played. She knew his story. Jonathan had purchased him from an estate in Natchez, a music teacher's slave, taught to play for entertainment at dinner parties. When the owner died, Elias had been sold with his violin, which Jonathan allowed him to keep because it increased his value for special occasions. But this wasn't music for white people's entertainment. This was something raw and honest, a hymn transformed into something that seemed to contain all the sorrow of the world. When his eyes opened and he saw her, the music stopped abruptly. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "No," she said quickly. "Don't apologize." That was beautiful. What was it? Just an old song, ma'am. Something my mother used to sing. "Wade in the water," but I changed it some. It was extraordinary. Could you play something else?" He hesitated, then brought the violin back to his shoulder. This time he played something lighter, a melody that danced despite the darkness of their world. She closed her eyes and let it wash over her, and for the first time in months, she felt something other than emptiness. "Thank you," she whispered when the song ended. "You're welcome, ma'am." She climbed the stairs back to her bedroom, and that night, for the first time in longer than she could remember, she slept deeply. Spring came to Louisiana with warmth and rain, and the scent of magnolias. Annabelle found herself spending more and more time in the garden, watching Silas work, gradually beginning to speak with him. At first, their conversations were simple, about weather, about plants, about nothing of consequence. But slowly, carefully, they began to speak of real things. He told her about his grandmother, a healer who'd known every plant that grew in the ground and what it was good for. She told him about the loneliness of her marriage, the emptiness of her life. "I'm a prisoner here just like you," she said one afternoon in April, "just in a prettier cage." He looked at her with those dark, knowing eyes. "It's not the same, ma'am. You know it's not." "No," she admitted. "You're right, but we're both trapped, just in different ways." He began teaching her about plants: feverfew for headaches, chamomile for sleep, mint for digestion. His hands would brush hers as he demonstrated techniques, and each touch sent electricity through her body. She found herself inventing reasons to be near him, to breathe the same air, to exist in the same space. One warm evening in May, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, he handed her a rose, a deep red bloom, perfect and fragrant. "This one's my favorite," he said softly. "Smells like hope, if hope had a smell." She brought it to her nose, breathing in the complex sweetness. What does hope smell like? Like something beautiful that might not last. Something you want to hold on to even though you know you can't. Their eyes met, and in that moment, everything changed. She saw the longing in his face, the same desperate need for connection that had been eating her alive for months, and she knew he saw the same in her. "Silas," she whispered. He stepped back quickly, breaking the moment. "It's getting dark, ma'am. You should go inside." But she didn't move. "I don't want to go inside. I don't want to go back to those empty rooms and that empty life. I want." She paused, gathering courage. "I want to feel alive. Just once." "Just for a moment. Mom, we can't. If anyone found out, no one will find out. There's no one here but the emptiness in us." He stood frozen, and she could see the war happening inside him, desire battling fear, humanity fighting survival instinct. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know what you're asking for." "Yes, I do. I'm asking to be human. To connect with someone who sees me as more than a decoration. To have one real thing in a life full of lies." The resistance in his eyes crumbled. "This is madness. I know. If we're caught, they'll kill me. Slowly, as a lesson. I know that too." He reached out and touched her face, a gesture so tender and so forbidden that they both trembled. "I see you, Annabelle. Not Mrs. Whitmore, not the master's wife. Just you. And you're beautiful and sad and trapped, and I wish—" His voice broke. "I wish the world was different. So do I." That night, in the greenhouse, while the house slept and rain fell on the glass roof above them, Annabelle stopped being a dutiful wife and became, for the first time, truly herself. With Elias, it happened differently, but just as inevitably. The music became a nightly ritual. She would position herself near wherever he was playing, letting the violin's voice speak to parts of her she hadn't known existed. Sometimes he would see her there and nod slightly. Sometimes he would play something just for her. She could tell by the way the music shifted, became more intimate, more honest. One night in June, she entered his room without knocking. He looked up, startled, the violin cradled in his arms. "Mrs. Whitmore, you shouldn't be here. I need to tell you something," she interrupted. "Your music, it reaches places in me I didn't know existed. It makes me feel things I thought I'd forgotten how to feel." He set down the violin carefully. "Mom, that's dangerous talk. Everything about this is dangerous. But I don't care anymore. I'm so tired of being alone, of pretending, of living half a life in this house of lies." He stood slowly, and she saw the same conflict she'd seen in Silas, desire against fear, the longing for connection fighting against the brutal reality of their world. "If we do this," he said quietly, "there's no going back. Everything changes. Everything's already changed. I just want to stop pretending it hasn't." He moved toward her, his musician's hands reaching for her face, learning her features the way he learned a new song. When he kissed her, it was tender and desperate and full of impossible longing. Afterward, he played his violin while she lay beside him in the darkness, and the music was so beautiful and so mournful that they both wept. Through the long, hot summer of 1860, Annabelle fell into a pattern that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Every night, after the house grew quiet and the overseer made his rounds, she would slip from her room. Some nights she went to the garden, to the greenhouse, to Silas and his earth-grounded presence. He would teach her about growing things while his hands learned her body, would whisper words of tenderness while they moved together in the dark. With him, she felt connected to something primal and real: the earth, the body, the simple truth of touch and desire. Other nights she went to Elias and his music, his spirit, his old soul trapped in a young body. He would play for her first, always, music that spoke what words couldn't. Then he would set down the violin, and they would come together with a tenderness that made her chest ache. With him, she felt seen in a way she'd never been before, not as an object or a possession, but as a complete human being. She told herself it was love, and perhaps it was, but it was also rebellion. It was also a desperate grasp at feeling human in a world that had turned her into property, just as surely as it had turned Silas and Elias into slaves. Different chains, perhaps, but chains nonetheless. They were careful, always careful, meeting only in the deepest hours of night, leaving no trace, giving no one reason to suspect. The house slaves knew, of course. They always knew everything. But they said nothing, understanding in their bones that this secret, if revealed, would end in blood and fire. The overseer, Dalton, suspected something. She could see it in the way he watched Silas and Elias, in the way his eyes narrowed when he saw her in the garden. But he had no proof, and without proof, he couldn't act. So he watched and waited, and Annabelle lived each day knowing that discovery was always one moment away. But she couldn't stop. For the first time in her life, she felt truly alive. For the first time, she was choosing connection over isolation, humanity over the law, love over the fear that had governed every moment of her existence. She knew it couldn't last. Knew that Jonathan would return eventually, that the pregnancy she was starting to suspect would reveal everything, that the reckoning was coming. But she pushed those thoughts away and lived in the present, in these stolen hours, in the touch of hands, and the sound of music, and the smell of roses in the dark. Act 5. The knowing. By August, there was no denying it. Annabelle's courses had stopped. Her breasts were tender and swollen. She felt a fluttering in her belly like butterfly wings. She was pregnant. She sat in her bedroom, hands pressed against her still flat stomach, and calculated. Jonathan had been gone for 6 months. The pregnancy was perhaps 2 months along, maybe a bit more. He wouldn't return until late September, 7 months after his departure. When he saw her pregnant, he might believe the child was his if she claimed it was premature. It was her only hope. But as August turned to September and her belly began to swell, she knew that hope was thin. The child would be born, showing clear signs of mixed heritage. She knew it in her bones. And when that happened, Silas and Elias would die, horribly publicly, as a lesson to every other enslaved person who dared to look at a white woman with desire. The baby would be killed too. Or worse, allowed to live as evidence of her sin, a reminder of transgression, doomed to a life of shame and suffering. She spent 3 days barely eating, speaking to no one, trying desperately to find a solution. But there was none. No escape. No way to hide what was coming. No way to protect the men she'd come to care for or the life growing inside her. On the third night, drowning in desperation, she did something she'd never done before. She went to the quarters, to the small cabin where Ruth lived. Ruth was the oldest enslaved woman at Whitmore Hall, nearly 70, bent with age but sharp-eyed and knowing. The other slaves sought her out for herb remedies and wisdom. There were whispers that she had gifts, that she could see things others couldn't, that the ancestors spoke to her in dreams. When Annabelle knocked on her cabin door, Ruth opened it without surprise, as if she'd been expecting this visit. "Come in, child," she said quietly. "Quickly now, before someone sees." Inside the small cabin, Annabelle's composure finally shattered. She sank onto the only chair and told Ruth everything: the loneliness that had driven her to Silas and Elias, the 7 months of secret nights, the pregnancy, Jonathan's impending return, the certain death awaiting everyone she cared about. I don't know what to do, she sobbed. I can't let him die because of me. I can't let my baby be murdered. But I don't see any way out. Please, Ruth, if there's any way at all, help me. Ruth sat on her pallet, silent for a long moment, her eyes unfocused, as if listening to something Annabelle couldn't hear. Finally, she spoke. The spirits have been talking to me about you, child, whispering in my dreams. They've shown me a way, a dangerous way, but the only way. What is it? Ruth leaned forward. The baby will come soon, earlier than you think. The stress and fear will bring on early labor. When that happens, I'll be ready. The spirits tell me that on the same day your baby is born, another baby will die. A white infant, born too weak to survive. I don't understand. We switch them, Ruth said simply. Your living baby for the dead white baby. The master sees a dead child beside you in the bed and believes it's his. He never suspects the truth. Meanwhile, your real baby, alive and hidden, gets taken north to freedom. And Silas and Elias, they run the same night before anyone thinks to connect them to anything. Annabelle stared at her. That's impossible. How can you know? Another baby will die. The spirits tell me things. They've never been wrong. Ruth gripped her hand. This will work. Child, you'll survive this. Your baby will be free. The men you love will escape. But you have to trust me completely. Can you do that? Annabelle felt hope kindle in her chest for the first time in weeks. Yes, I can trust you. Good. Then when the time comes, when the labor starts, you do exactly as I say. And you be ready to leave this place forever. You understand? After the baby comes, after we make the switch, you'll have to disappear too. Go north with your son. Leave Louisiana. Annabelle had never imagined such a thing. But how? The Underground Railroad. There are people who can help. You'll have to leave everything behind. Your name, your past, everything. But you'll be alive. You'll be with your son. You'll be free. Annabelle nodded, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of despair anymore, but of hope. Impossible, fragile hope. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, child. We still have to make it work. Around 4 a.m, Esther the midwife arrived and examined Annabelle with practiced hands. Baby's coming fast. Too fast. That's all right, Ruth said calmly. Everything is going according to plan. Push. Esther commanded. The baby's crowning. Annabelle pushed with everything she had. The pain was beyond description, beyond anything she'd imagined. And then, a cry. Thin but alive. It's a boy, Esther whispered, holding up a tiny, squirming creature. Even in the dim light, Annabelle could see her son's skin was pale but not quite white, his features a delicate blend of heritages. He was beautiful. Perfect. Let me hold him, Annabelle gasped. Ruth brought the baby to her. Annabelle cradled her son against her chest, her heart flooding with love so fierce it hurt. You're going to be free, she whispered to him. We're going to be free together. Ruth smiled, relief washing over her face. I need to take him now, just for a moment. Old Joe's waiting with the other baby. We'll make the switch, and then we get you both out of here. Annabelle kissed her son's forehead and reluctantly handed him to Ruth. Hurry, please. Ruth wrapped the baby tightly and handed him to Esther. Take him to Old Joe. I'll prepare Mrs. Whitmore to travel. But as Esther slipped away with the living baby, Annabelle cried out, not in triumph, but in sudden, terrible pain. Ruth turned back and saw it immediately, blood. Too much blood. Pouring from Annabelle's body in a way that wasn't normal, wasn't right. No, Ruth whispered, rushing back to the bed. No. She pressed cloths against Annabelle's body, trying desperately to slow the bleeding, but it kept coming. Hemorrhaging, the complication that killed so many women in childbirth, the one thing Ruth hadn't foreseen because the spirits hadn't warned her. Ruth? Annabelle's voice was weak, confused. What's happening? Why does it hurt so much? Shoo, child. Just rest. You're going to be fine. But Ruth's hands were shaking as she tried to stop the unstoppable. I'm cold, Annabelle whispered. Why am I so cold? Ruth felt panic rising in her chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. The spirits had shown her the baby surviving, the men escaping, the plan working. They hadn't shown her this. Ruth, I can't I can't feel my legs. Fear crept into Annabelle's voice. Something's wrong, isn't it? Ruth looked at this young woman who trusted her, who'd believed in the plan, who was supposed to escape north with her baby and live free. And she realized with crushing certainty that the spirits had shown her an incomplete vision. They'd shown her the baby's freedom, the men's escape, but they'd never shown her Annabelle surviving. Listen to me, Ruth said, gripping Annabelle's hand tightly. Your son is safe. Silas and Elias are running right now. They're all going to make it. You did it, child. You saved them, but I wanted. Annabelle's eyes were losing focus. I wanted to see him grow up. I wanted to hold him again. I know, child. Ruth's tears fell onto their clasped hands. I'm so sorry. I thought you'd make it. I truly thought. Don't. Annabelle interrupted weakly. Don't apologize. You gave me hope. Even if just for a little while, you let me believe I could have everything. She smiled faintly. That was a gift. Her breathing was growing shallow. Ruth wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness of it all, that this woman who'd been so brave, who'd risked everything for love, wouldn't live to see the freedom she'd fought for. My son, Annabelle whispered. Tell him his mother loved him. Tell him I'm sorry. I couldn't stay, but I wanted to. Tell him to be extraordinary. I'll tell him, Ruth promised through her tears. He'll know. I swear to you, he'll know. Annabelle's eyes closed. Her hand went limp in Ruth's grasp. And just like that, she was gone. Ruth sat frozen, holding the hand of a dead woman, staring at a future that had just shattered into something completely different than what she'd planned. The baby would still be free. The men would still escape. But Annabelle, brave, foolish, beautiful Annabelle, had paid a price no one had expected her to pay. A soft knock at the servant's entrance broke through Ruth's grief. Old Joe entered carrying the dead white baby wrapped in cloth. He took one look at Annabelle's body and his face fell. She didn't make it. No, Ruth said, her voice hollow. The spirits didn't warn me. They showed me the baby's freedom, the men's escape, but they didn't show me this. Sometimes they only show us what we need to see to do what needs doing, Old Joe said quietly. If you'd known she was going to die, would you have made the plan? Ruth thought about it. Yes, because the baby still deserves to live free. The men still deserve to escape. Her death doesn't change that. No, Old Joe agreed. It doesn't. Together, they placed the dead white baby beside Annabelle on the bed, arranging them to look as if mother and child had died together in childbirth. Ruth cleaned the blood, made everything look as peaceful as she could, all while her heart broke for the young woman who'd believed in freedom and never got to taste it herself. The living baby? Ruth asked. Esther's got him at my workshop. I'll take him to the safe house tonight. Good. Ruth took one last look at Annabelle's peaceful face. She was so brave. And she died thinking she'd failed. She didn't fail, Old Joe said firmly. She gave her son life and freedom. That's not failure. That's love. After the speech in Boston, after the crowd had dispersed and the applause had faded, Freedom stood alone in his room, looking at the one possession he had from his mother, a dried rose, preserved for 25 years, that Ruth had pressed into Old Joe's hand the night of his birth. She was holding this when she went to the garden the night before you were born. Ruth had told him years later, when she was dying and wanted him to know everything. She kept it in her pocket. I think she knew, somehow, that something was ending. That she was saying goodbye to the life she'd had. Even if she didn't know, it would cost her everything. Freedom held the brittle rose carefully, afraid it might crumble to dust. I'm sorry, Mama, he whispered. I'm sorry you never got to be free. Never got to leave that place. Never got to hold me again. But even as he said it, he understood something Ruth had tried to explain. His mother had been free. Maybe only for 7 months. Maybe only in stolen moments in a garden and a dark room with music playing. But she'd chosen love over fear, humanity over law, connection over the isolation that had been killing her. She'd been more free in those 7 months than most people were in a lifetime. I'll make it count. Freedom promised the dried rose, the memory of a woman he'd never known, but who'd given him everything. I'll make your sacrifice count. And he did. Freedom became one of the most influential voices in the abolitionist movement, a bridge between black and white activists, a living symbol of what love could create even in the darkest circumstances. Silas taught him about the earth, about growing things, about patience and nurturing life. Elias taught him music, gave him a violin of his own, showed him how to speak truths too deep for words. And between them, they taught him about his mother, Annabelle Whitmore, who'd been trapped in a gilded cage and had broken herself free, who'd loved two men she wasn't supposed to love, who'd created life in defiance of all the laws designed to prevent it. She died so you could live, Silas told him once. Not because she chose to die, but because that's what her love cost. And she'd have paid it again, knowing what she knew. Because love like that doesn't calculate costs. It just gives everything. Freedom understood, and he spent his life honoring that gift, fighting for a world where no one would have to make such impossible choices, where love wouldn't require such terrible sacrifices, where freedom was a birthright rather than something people died trying to grasp. His mother had reached for freedom and touched it only briefly before death took her, but her son lived free, and in that freedom, she lived on. The end. Some people give their lives fighting for freedom. Others give their lives creating it. Annabelle Whitmore did both. May her name be remembered, and may her son's freedom be the monument to her courage. Like and subscribe if this story spoke to you. Tell us in the comments, what did you think of Annabelle's fight for freedom? And whose untold story should we bring to light next?